He was, and he was very emotional. I've known Rex since he was a ball boy at Eagles training camp at Westchester University. So when I said to him, Rex, I've known you for a long, long time, and this is the most emotional I've ever seen you, he was already in a state of emotional flux. He started to tear up at the press conference a little bit and had to gather himself. And then he saw a couple of his ex-Jets employees waiting outside the press conference room. There's a hallway at MetLife Stadium. Ironically, right next to the drunk tank is where they put the visitors' press conference room. Maybe that's not ironic. Maybe that's on purpose, but that's where it is. And the drunk tank is across the hallway from the entrance to the visitors' locker room, if you can believe it. So while you have, it's a night game, and people are drinking all day, and there was a lot of people coming in and out being escorted by state police officers. And here's Rex in an emotional state, and then there's a couple of Jets employees he hasn't seen in a long time there to congratulate him. And interestingly, Mike, and I haven't talked about this on the air before this. Before he did the interview with me, he asked to be excused. He asked Scott Birchtold, the PR director for the Bills, to give him a minute. And we stood there with our camera and my producer from New York, and we waited for him to come back out from the locker room. He had to gather himself again. So that's when I got to him. And it was also interesting that last night he did no other one-on-one interviews. He did not do any with the game broadcast or with the NFL Network. I was the only one, so I felt very lucky that he chose me for that moment. It was a special moment.
Well, and I agree, because I'm watching this and I'm like, man, this guy, this is we talked about it yesterday. What was going to be better, the game or the moments and the stories on the sidelines? And I said, with Rex, the moments and the stories are great. You got to watch what's happening. And he really brought them out last night. When they got that interception, Sal, I mean, his emotions went flying. I mean, a couple expletives were flying. I mean, he was juiced up. I don't know that I've ever seen an NFL head coach in the moment like that be that pumped up.
You know, he didn't want to leave. He went to back-to-back AFC championship games. He felt he got robbed by the decision not to bring Darrelle Revis back, allowing Revis to walk to New England. He felt like he was undermined by the general manager that was brought in, John Itzik, who had a disastrous draft and a disastrous free agency period for 2 straight years. And he felt like his front office let him down. And, he actually, before the last game of the year, he actually cleaned out his office, knowing that he was going to get fired.
Wow.
And so it was very emotional for him. I got to tell you a quick story, Mike. My first ever sporting event that I ever covered on any level was the Fog Bowl.
Oh.
And in 1988, I was assigned to go to Chicago to help out the coverage of the Fog Bowl and to meet Buddy Ryan upon his return to Chicago. Eagles versus Bears.
Yep.
The game was on New Year's Eve, 1988. And I met Buddy that Friday afternoon when the Eagles arrived at Midway International Airport. And Buddy got in the front seat of the team bus. He invited me on. I sat next to him. And that was that famous scene where he was in the team buses and they rolled around Soldier Field honking their horns with TV crews tailing them.
Wow.
And he arrived like a rock star, and this was very reminiscent of Buddy going back to Chicago, of Rex going back to MetLife. So how about that?
That's a pretty cool story, because you know what? That's about the first football game as a kid that I really kind of recall that I was into as like a football fan. I remember watching it vividly on my father's living room floor and saying, Dad, I can't see any of the players. What's going on here? Let me ask you that while we're talking about Rex. How much of his father do you see in him? You covered Buddy, obviously. How much of Buddy is in Rex?
A lot. Brash, bold, won't back down. All of that's there. But you got to remember, Buddy was a U.S. Marine. Buddy is a pretty buttoned-up, hardcore conservative guy. Rex is a little more loose, as a next generation would want to be. There's no question that they are different, but he is his father's son in many ways, especially with the DNA of blitzing the quarterback coursing through his veins. You know, it's pretty interesting going back to December 31st, 1988. Now, this is the first ever sporting event I have ever been assigned to cover. I had been assigned to cover it because I was taking the place of a sports writer who left the newspaper at the last minute, left the sports department actually. And so I was thrown into this mix. So I had no history whatsoever of how to cover a game. And when the fog rolled in, Mike, I literally got out of my press box seat while every other reporter was still in the press box, because up at Soldier Field, it's way high up. And I went down the stands and I jumped onto the field. Now, those were the days, obviously, pre 9/11, where you could pretty much do anything you wanted to. And the fog rolling in, everybody was distracted. So I hopped onto the field and I watched the game standing next to Harry Gamble, the former GM, and the former owner, Norman Brayman, from their perspective. And I wound up writing the story from the field level, from their perspective, giving their quotes as it was happening in real time. They were screaming at Jim Tunney, the referee, to call the game because you literally couldn't see. And I think, I'm not going out on a limb here, and I'm not trying to be a homer, but I'm just going to say this. If the fog doesn't roll in, the Eagles win that game.
That's a great story, by the way. That's awesome stuff. Last night was really cool. Even if you're not a fan of those two teams, I thought the Rex was pretty cool, and it was good.
Mike, I had to hitchhike back, Mike, to O'Hare Airport because there were no taxis because the place was bedlam. And I hitchhiked to O'Hare Airport, caught the last flight to Philly, and celebrated New Year's Eve a little bit late with my wife in Haddon Township, New Jersey. Woke up the next morning, and the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer was an entire front page headline, Eagles lose in the fog, and just a photograph of Buddy Ryan with his back to the camera looking out onto a field, and you could see nothing but white smoke.
Yep. Sal Paolantonio is with us. It's a Sal Pal Friday. Really good story to start it all off. Sal, let's take a look at what's ahead here. Sam Bradford this week, he said the offense has, quote, found what we're good at. So, did he turn a corner enough against the Cowboys to make that statement accurate?
Well, that's a great question. Now, you always come up with some good ones, some incisive questions based on the evidence. And here's what we have found in studying the tape. Specifically, I'm talking about Ron Jaworski and the NFL Matchup Show, because if you're an Eagles fan, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the show and I'm based here. If you're a football fan, you want to tape the Matchup Show this week because Ron Jaworski has a frame-by-frame breakdown of how the Eagles went after Greg Hardy and ran right at him, and the things that they did. They talked about it after the game. Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey in particular. What they did is on tape, and you will see it if you watch our show. I'm not going to give more of it away. Tape it, DVR it, whatever you have to do, and watch Jaws' piece. It is so insightful and revealing of what they did in the running game against the Cowboys, and particularly attacking Greg Hardy physically, that you're going to be proud to be an Eagles fan. I'm going to tell you right now. And I think what Sam Bradford and the Eagles offense has found, alluding to your question, Mike, is this. They found that two tight end work. It keeps the wide receivers off the field and allows them to have extra block for an offensive line that's been decimated by injury. Tight end sets for 4 straight weeks. First time in the era is over 25% of the offensive snaps. First time, Chip Kelly era, 2 tight end sets over a quarter of the offensive snaps.
I like these numbers.
That is a serious trend. That's why they're running the ball for the first time in the Chip Kelly era for 4 straight weeks. They have run the ball for 150 yards or more.
Well, they look good. And are we finally seeing what the plan was for Murray and Matthews? Is this what, I think we still could say Matthews is a more explosive runner and that maybe there's even more if he gets more touches. But is this finally, are we seeing what Chip had in mind with these two guys?
No, he stumbled into it, Mike. He stumbled into it. They got their rear ends handed to them in the Washington game, and everything changed since then. They slowed down the offense, 1. They abandoned the inside zone read run play, 2. They went to the power outside sweeps and the outside zone read run. They went to 2 tight end sets to give them extra blocking. And they've decided, all right, well, we'll run Matthews this amount on the outside and Murray this amount on the outside and this amount on the inside, and they're peppering the 2 of them in there. The byproduct of it is that Darren Sproles, their most rebel and explosive offensive player, in my view, has been underutilized. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah,
right
I
now,
think a lot of fans would agree with you there.
Yeah, they would. Right now, they run the ball over 150 yards per game for 4 straight games, first time in the 2.5 years of the Kelly era. So they stumbled on it. It's working. But, teams are going to be able to attack it. I don't think the Dolphins can. They have the worst run defense in the league, or one of the worst. And when you look at them, their linebackers are very bad at setting the edge. They're just not very good at tackling on the edge. And right now the Eagles are very good on the edges.
And the question, you brought up the point about Hardy. They went right at him. Is that a similar thing you do with Sue? I mean, he's obviously a different position there, but is that the guy you got to go right at?
No. Sue's a talented run defender having a bad year. Please don't poke that bear.
Well, I'll tell you, you mentioned the linebackers for this team, and Sue, they lost Wake. The last 2 weeks, they've been horrendous on defense. The last 2 weeks, they've given up over 33 points. The Eagles have scored 27 a game in their 3 wins here over the 3 out of 4 here. It seems like this is one of those games, but is it? Is it one of those games where you take for granted sometimes that this team's lost 2 in a row and they look really bad in doing so, or is this Dolphins team out of luck? Dead on DOA here.
I think they're DOA. I really do. I don't see a scenario in which the Dolphins threaten them on any matchup. Go down the list. Where is there a matchup that the Dolphins are superior to the Eagles right now? I don't see one.
I don't got one for you. You and I agree there. All right, Sal, I want to ask you about Jenkins. The NFL had to come out with a statement. And it's just a football question about Jenkins. Are you surprised about this? Or should we be surprised about Malcolm Jenkins and not say anything? Or do you think this is still something that these guys want to be out there?
So Malcolm Jenkins is a smart player, a smart man, an experienced player. I think Malcolm Jenkins understands the mistake that he made. He's got to set a better example, 1. And 2, he has to understand his responsibility to his family. But you're in the heat of the moment. And what do we always say about the heat of the moment, whether it's on the battlefield or the football field? You're playing, you're fighting for the guy next to you. You don't want to let that guy down.
Right.
He's the one that you have to face every day in the locker room or in the bivouac or in the foxhole. You don't want to let that guy down. So I completely understand the rationale that he used in order to stay out on the football field. I know that's not politically correct, but I am not going to criticize Malcolm Jenkins. I'm just not.
Well, I'll say this, by the way, I agree with you. It's because the game, these guys, and it's not like Jenkins leaves the field, he's fearful of losing his position. They don't really have a lot of depth behind him. It's just that's the way they play the game. To ask these guys to change like this, I think it's hurting the aesthetically of the game.
Now, Mike, if I were his son or his spouse or his coach, I wouldn't say those words to him.
Sure. Sal, by the way, Rizzo, how'd it go? How did it all turn out? I heard a lot of great stuff.
It was 5.5 straight weeks of sold-out performances, and we hope to bring it to a larger theater in the spring. So I appreciate you mentioning it. But let me tell you, Mike, do yourself a favor. Tell your friends. Put it out on Twitter. Tape the matchup show and watch Jaws' breakdown of how the Eagles demoralized Greg Hardy on the outside sweep run play. Please put it on Twitter. And please tell everybody, and I'm not just trying to pump it up for the ratings. It's just fun to watch and it makes you proud to be an Eagles fan.
Good stuff. Well, Sal, good stories, good stuff. Eagles win, right?
Eagles win. I'm going to go 24-13.
24-13. Sal Pal Fridays, everybody, here on 97.3. Sal, we'll talk to you next week, bud.
Okay, Chief.